Number 10, adhesive bras. Okay, we'll kick this list off with a sticky mess right off the hop. Back in 1949, Life magazine released an article that caught everybody's attention, obviously. May 16th, 1948, the article read, "For 5,000 years, clothes have been draped, tied, buttoned, pinned, and buckled on the human form." Now at this point, somebody walking by would go, "Oh, what's this about?" Then it continues, "This year, for the first time in history, they will be glued on." Yes, what in the world? How? How is that possible? One newspaper, please. Let's do it. Inventor Charles Langs, he changed the game in 1949. He made bra cups that would stick to you with adhesive. He was the OG who did this. Now, it didn't feel too good. Didn't quite work right off the bat, as most things do. The special glue, this adhesive, was promised to leave behind no residue. It was promised to be painless, yet at the same time, stay glued on, even if you were to jump into a pool from 10 feet high. That was the sell. Yeah, sounds kind of impossible, right? It was. Number 9, facial expressions experiment. Okay, here's a wild one. We're gonna get dark right off the bat, immediately changing up the vibe. The facial expressions experiment was no good. Back in 1924, a psychologist with the University of Minnesota, he wanted to conduct an experiment to study facial expressions, right? Sounds pretty harmless so far, dare I say, sounds a little bit silly. More specifically though, he wanted to see if everybody's expressions of emotions were the same. Does happiness look the same on everyone? Does sadness look the same? What about fear? What about shock? What about disgust or anger or even pain? Yeah, so he recruited some volunteers, didn't tell them all the details from campus, and then he painted the lines of their facial muscles black. He wanted to see how each muscle would move, even the slightest movements. He then exposed each participant to different stimuli in order to photograph their reactions, and then compare the results to everyone else, which would look kind of creepy on a wall now that I'm talking about it. It gets worse when you find out what the stimuli actually contained. I guess this guy wanted big reactions because he included showing them adult films, he exposed them to ammonia, he made them touch reptiles and dangerous animals, and of course he exposed them to horrible things that I can't even talk about here on YouTube. Yeah, you can only imagine back in the day what the he saw. It was horrible. Yeah, horrible, right? That's a sad face. Big sad face in that one. For 8, the Detroit Ice Fountain. Located in Washington Boulevard, the Detroit Ice Fountain was obviously such a hazard. We can never do this again. This is horrible. You'll never see this. It was a spectacle, of course, but it was a hazard nonetheless. Back in the early 1900s, a fountain was the talk of the town during colder months. The water jets would run all year long for some reason. No one wanted to shut those off. They just let them go. So in turn, this fountain would freeze and pile up, and then freeze and pile up, and so on and Danforth. Now eventually it reached up to 60 feet tall, made of pure ice, right there on Washington Boulevard. It was a tourist attraction at that point. This was so dangerous. Yeah, shifting ice, dangling 60 feet above your loved one. What could go wrong? I can only imagine. Just tons of ice cracking all around you. Families would just gather around. It was horrible. The tradition has now moved to Bell Island, so you can safely observe ice trees instead. A little bit nicer, yeah. Just not in the middle of the street anymore. Please? Thank you. Number 7, spin doctors. Oh, this is amazing. Remember when you were a kid and you'd spin around with your friends and make yourself dizzy and be like, oh my god, it's great. Or I guess if you're just doing that now, it's cool too, sure. If you're a weird adult. It's all fun and games until somebody passes out or hits their head, right? That's why we don't do it often. Well, back in the mid-19th century, this was how medical experts would put you to sleep. Yeah, more specifically, this is how they used to treat schizophrenia and other mental illnesses. They would just spin them and then see what happens. There was a whirling chair and a whirling bed, so you can pick your fate, I guess. A whirling bed, you ever lay down after a night out and you feel like your bed's spinning? It was that times 1,000, pretty much. They would spin these poor patients around until they blacked out, and the goal was to literally shuffle the contents of their brain around. That was their medical advice. Yeah, I'm glad we don't do that anymore. Imagine going into the hospital and being like, yeah, I got hit in hockey, my head kind of hurts a bit, I don't know. They're like, oh, no problem. Just get on this zipper here and just spin around for a hot minute. See how you feel. Number 6, animal droppings. Hey, got a sore throat? No sweat. Dog will fix that. Animal droppings being used in history for medicinal practice will always be hilarious. But it checks out, right? You have to look at the facts. Makes a lot more sense than spinning a guy until he's unconscious, that's for sure. Ancient Egyptian doctors, they would use donkey, gazelle, fly, and dog droppings to ward off bad spirits. Microflora was often found in these droppings, so the consensus was that these properties could include antibiotic substances as well, so poop was used for medicinal purposes as well in history. In 1957, a microbiologist, Stanley Falco, he began instructing folk to eat their own poop for medical reasons, which we here on Bumblebee actually disagree with. Don't do that. I'll tell you what you can do though, subscribe. That's much nicer. That has better results than eating your own. We don't want that. Number 5. Reindeer pet. Okay, Olivia and I are talking about a dog, but a reindeer? Maybe. I'll try and convince her. June 1941, the Germans were attacking the Soviet Union. It was one of the biggest attacks in history, and Britain and US had to send weapons, supplies, anything really, just to keep them afloat. Just to keep them in the fight, okay? So they sent these supplies through the Arctic Circle, which was the only route. But of course, it was littered with U-boats. Now thankfully, the British HMS Trident was there to watch the waters, and in turn, the Soviets were able to fight on. So as a gift, as a thank you, the Soviets sent the captain of said Trident, the World War II submarine, they sent them a live reindeer. Here you go. Don't eat them, just enjoy them. Please, just enjoy the reindeer. The British had to accept because of course it was ill-mannered if they didn't. So yeah, they had to keep a 6-foot-tall, real-life, alive reindeer on a submarine. That's so stressful. She probably had a horrible time. Her name was Pollyanna, and they brought her on board through a torpedo tube. That was her little commute onto the thing. She was a crew member for 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Talk about smell. That's gonna, PU. 6 weeks in there? Get out of here. She slept better than most, believe it or not. She shared a room in the captain's quarters. Again, imagine the smell. I'm just saying. Number 4, ice baths. We mentioned an ice fountain earlier, that was for sure a hazard, but let's talk about some old ice remedies. So if you saw somebody having an ice bath today, you wouldn't think anything of it, right? Maybe they just finished leg day and they're trying to reduce inflammation. Maybe they're trying to improve breathing, all that good stuff, you know? But back in the day, ice baths weren't just for athletes, right? They were meant for those who had rabies. Yeah, athletes and rabies, here you go, hop in. Rabies was of course a growing concern in Europe in the 1700s, so a treatment was to take 40 grains of ground liverwort, add some pepper, mix it up in milk, and then drink it, as well as having an ice bath. Both those things right there, we go. Do that 4 times a day and rabies should be gone. Historically, it didn't happen, but that's what they wanted to happen. That's like a fear factor challenge. That's one of the worst things I've ever heard. Liver milk and a nice bath? Horrible. Happy Sunday, I guess. Number 3, tapeworms. Back in the Victorian times, they really figured out the trick to weight loss. Nice. Was it watching what you eat, counting your steps, maybe getting a gym membership at ye old gym? No, it was way easier than all those combined. And you didn't even have to pull back on what you ate. How great is that? All you needed was a handy tapeworm. Yeah, a little tapeworm inside you all the time. You know those things that can kill you if you get one today? Yeah, that was their plan back in the Victorian days. The plan was, if you eat a tapeworm egg, it will later hatch in your stomach, and at that point you could just eat anything you wanted, because every time you ate, the tapeworm, he would also eat. So you could get your snack on while still rocking those Victorian skinny jeans, know what I'm saying? Tapeworm cyst pills or the Stairmaster? I don't know, take your bets. He's like, I'm hungry. Number 2, smoking solutions. All right, don't smoke, don't do that. Here at Bumblebee, we say don't smoke. Back in 1665, during a plague in London, you were told to smoke cigarettes because they were considered disinfectants. This is wrong. This is, again, don't smoke. Yeah, sore throat, no problem. I'm sure this pack of darts will help. Here you go. We mentioned before tobacco smoke enemas, which is hilarious, but this is just bad advice all around. Since mouth-to-mouth wasn't a thing until the 50s, if you were trying to save a drowning victim, you would ideally blow smoke in their face or their butts. Either way, don't do it, it's insane. And then cut to 1964, it turns out smoking is bad for us. Yeah, what? Who knew? Who would have thought? Yeah, it's pretty intense now. The photos on cigarette packages, they're haunting to look at. Number 1, ants, man. Okay, I'm totally gonna jinx myself for this, but I've never broken a bone or gotten stitches in my life. Knock on wood, knock on wood. Chris, have you? Bones or stitches? Bone yes, stitches no. Okay. Comment down below. Bone yes, stitches no. That's gonna be a weird comment section, but I'm here for it. Many of my friends have gotten stitches in their life. It's obviously pretty common, so I figured I'd cap this list off going back to the origins of stitches because it sounds very painful and it's impressive. Going back to 3000 BC, once again, Egyptian literature, this is where you could find this. Stitches were first made from plants like hemp or cotton or animal tendons, animal arteries, you name it. Catgut was common. That was thread made out of sheep intestines. That's a fun one to get right there. It's probably smelly. One of the craziest ways, though, of closing a wound was by using ants. Real life ants, believe it or not. Leafcutter ants, or army ants, they would be held against the opening of your wound, and you'd wait down for it to bite. Now, once the ant bit, you would cut its head off so that the head of the ant was still stuck biting onto your wound, staying there ideally until the wound heals up. Yeah, imagine Ant-Man shows up to save the day and he just shows a pocket full of army ants. Not what I expected at all, but still helps me. Thank you so much, Ant-Man, you're the best. Please send somebody else next time. Awesome, this is so itchy. Number 10, the aviator suit. When it comes to new ideas or new inventions, it almost always starts messy, right? In some way, shape, or form. In today's list, it gets a little messy. A lot of horrible experiments done with groups of unaware subjects. To kick this grim one off, we'll look back to the early 1900s. We'll start with Franz Rachels, a known inventor of the time. He invented his own version of a wearable aviator suit, basically a parachute, and it was made of 320 square feet of fabric, so not light at all. There's a lot of weight in his backpack. Now, in 1912, Franz wanted to test his new invention out publicly. Instead of using a dummy and throwing that dummy off the Eiffel Tower, he himself leaped. He strapped himself in and he leaped to his own death. Yeah, try not to say too many dark things here, but it was tragic. He publicly failed an experiment, and I think there's one photo of it online. It's like the only photo too of the 1900s, and it happens to be this guy. Number 9, monkey head transplant. Okay, this one's gonna make your head spin. The first ever successful monkey head transplant was back in the early 1970s. I imagine some of your parents may have heard about this. I bet it would be pretty hard to forget. I don't know, ask them about it. Ask them in the middle of dinner. Be like, hey, what about that monkey head transplant? They'll spit out their spaghetti and be like, how do you know about that? American researcher Robert White pulled off the otherwise impossible in a slow, tedious, horrible operation. White took the head of one monkey and then attached it to a headless monkey. Now add a little time and energy and patience, voila, this actually worked out. Yeah, the monkey actually tried to bite one of the surgeons once it came back to life, which, I mean, totally fair. I'd be a little pissed off too. I'd try and bite someone if they put my head over there. Sadly, the monkey passed away 9 days later, but like the fact that this actually happened, 1, is terrifying. 2, dare I say it's a little miraculous. It's obviously scientifically insane. And 3, it's quite unfair to the animal in question, so let's never do this one again, shall we? Number 8, the Kola Super Deep Borehole. Alright, let's put all our resources together and dig a deep hole. If you dug a hole through the center of the earth and then you jumped in, would you come out on the other side? Of course not. This isn't a cartoon. You would melt. You wouldn't get anywhere close. But it is the Arctic Circle in the 1970s, and Russia had a budget for such a thing. So a test was underway. Scientists began working on the project in 1970, and they got to about 40,000 feet come 1989. So for that many years, Russian dudes in winter coats were all just waiting, watching a hole be drilled. I love this. I love this image in my head. That's awesome. They got 1/3 through the Baltic continental crust. They got really deep and they found rocks older than 2 billion years old, which is great. But eventually they hit this muddy lava. What do you know? And they had to pack it up. A huge concern here was that demons would be released from the earth. That's fair. That's more than fair. That's a thought that I would probably have if I was deep down there. Okay, for sure. The previous title for deepest hole belonged to the United States Bertha Rogers hole, which reached 31,000 feet. Stanley Yelnats would be so proud, honestly. He'd be watching like, oh yes, you guys are killing it. Number 7, Talos.
Basically, I'm here to announce that we're building Iron Man.
Tactical Assault Light Operator Suit, aka Talos for short, was a project announced back in 2014. And like the former President Barack Obama said, this was supposed to be a modern-day Iron Man suit of armor. It was supposed to change warfare entirely, but 5 years later the project was completely scrapped. Well, obviously it's hard to do. I mean, we could barely launch Google Maps that same year, let alone a suit of armor, so okay, fair. It's tricky. Also, Steve Jobs is dead, so no one can figure this one out. Ideally, the suit would have given the user advanced tactical awareness and advanced military-grade armor, which has an exoskeleton underneath that's obviously wired to the helmet and then wired to the rest of the suit. It's cool. They figured a few things out while creating the suit, but overall, the Iron Man armor wasn't close to being like what we see on the big screen. Number 6, the Hoffling Hospital Experiment. This experiment happened all the way back in 1966, in a time where the rules of psychological experiments were a little more loose, a little more, we don't care, try some out. Right? It's horrible. Because of this, the nurses that were all part of this experiment actually had no idea that they were participants of the experiment, which nowadays would be illegal. That's correct. That's illegal. You can't do that. Basically, this experiment took place during the night shift. Now, this night nurse would receive a phone call during the shift, and on the other end would be one Dr. Smith, who's actually the researcher. He's in on the whole thing. He would ask the nurses quickly to check the medicine cabinet to see if they had astrotin, which was actually a drug that was made up for this experiment. It was actually just a placebo, not a real pharmaceutical. Now, the astrotin would clearly state the maximum dosage of 10 milligrams, but this Dr. Smith, in a hurry over the phone, would ask the nurses to administer 20 milligrams. That's a big no-no. You can't do that ever. They were told that the doctor was in a hurry and that he would sign the authorization papers as soon as he came in to see the patient later on that night. Now, if the nurse decided to give the patient the drug, they would be breaking 3 rules. 1, they're not allowed to accept instructions over the phone. 2, the dose was double the maximum limit stated on the box. And 3, the medicine itself was unauthorized. It was made up. It wasn't in the ward stock list, so it shouldn't be used in the hospital, period. Now, out of the 22, again, unknowing nurse patients, 21 of them went to administer this. Yeah, big oof on that one. Big yikes. But to be fair, that's the entire point of this test. So you look back and you're like, oh, that's not fair. We shouldn't have done that. We have to tell them. But you're also like, but it worked. 21 out of 22? I mean, this was 1966. We don't, obviously got a little bit messy, but this really showed the pressures that nurses were put under. Get a phone call from a random guy and go, oh, I hope so. Number 5, the Battle of Los Angeles. Ooh, this was a big whoops, big loud whoops for this one. The Battle of Los Angeles, otherwise known as the Great Los Angeles Air Raid, happened during World War II at the end of February 1942. This event, first of all, took place only a few months after the Pearl Harbor attack, so of course everybody was obviously immensely stressed out at the time. Something like 25 enemy aircraft was then spotted flying over Los Angeles in the late hours of February 24th. So air raids went off, blackouts were immediately put in effect. This was not a drill. Or was it? Everything was blasted towards this disturbance. In total, around 1,400 shells were shot off. 2 people had heart attacks. 5 people died in total from this retaliation, and it was all a false alarm. Nobody was attacking, nobody was there. To this day, we still can't explain it. A press conference was held by the Secretary of the Navy, Frank Knox, and he called the incident war nerves. He's like, whoops, thought I heard a noise, oops, my bad, to all those individuals who had heart attacks. Number 4, backyard dog breeding. Okay, don't try crossbreeding at home. I don't think I have to tell you why you're eating your Mr. Noodles here watching this at 2 a.m. Don't breed animals. Great, hit that thumbs up. Awesome, good plan. Because things go south, right? Obviously. For example, back in 2010, a woman named Julie Leroy, she was working as an animal control officer. She got a call, an owner of a pit bull puppy said she didn't want to keep her. So when Julie arrived and saw the dog, she was then in complete disbelief. This dog was not just a pit bull dog. This dog was a hybrid and it wasn't healthy at all. But again, all the more reason why you should stick around for the thing. The dog had a squished body, it had a huge jaw, and a terrible underbite. Its body was so deformed from birth due to short spine syndrome. That's because they got said dog from a backyard breeder who was just carelessly breeding a bunch of dogs together, not really thinking about the consequences. Now thankfully, Julie did bring that dog home and gave her a loving home for the rest of her life. Her name's Kuda, and now she's in great hands. She's actually really, really cute. Dogs with short spine syndrome. Obviously it's wildly uncomfortable, but man, I love dogs, they're all cute. Number 3, Stanford Prison Experiment. Perhaps the most famous psychological experiment gone wrong. The Stanford Prison Experiment started on August 14, 1971, and was led by university psychology professor Philip Zimbardo. Now, the experiment took volunteers and divided them into 2 groups. One group of prisoners and then the other group of guards. Then they placed all the volunteers into this fake prison that was created for the experiment, and the experiment aimed to see if and how quickly humans would just turn evil under the right conditions with the right amount of power. Pretty twisted, but yeah, I'd say we deserve to know what happens. It's a group version of the Milgram experiment, so it's an awful experiment on paper, but it's something you think about for 40 years afterwards. It was a test to try and answer the question of if humans are inherently good or inherently evil. And after just 6 days, the experiment needed to be wrapped up because the guards began tormenting the prisoners. Yeah, humans are awful, it seems. It really showed the kinds of things humans can be capable of even after such a short time with such a short small change of power. You know what I mean? Like, this was less than a week, and these people are already turning into wild, horrible dictators in a fake prison. Number 2, the Great Stink of 1858. It's one thing living through a pandemic, but at least we're not living through something called the Great Stink. This was an event in central London, and it lasted for a few months. In the summertime too, which is just great for great stinks. It was so hot and dry that the Thames River dried up, leaving just sewage left over. In order to continue to work, Parliament had to soak the curtains on the riverside in lime chloride just so that they wouldn't be sick doing their jobs. They almost moved their office to Oxford. That's how bad it smelled. Members of the committee were quitting their jobs. This is hilarious. I mean, it sounds horrible and stuff, but you have to laugh. Imagine formally quitting because it smells that bad. Hundreds of tons of lime were actually being discharged into sewers to hold the smell. So if you had a stuffy nose in July 1858, you could have made 1,500 pounds a week just by putting lemons and limes and stuff into sewers. Nobody wanted to do this job at all. So if you didn't mind the stinky stuff and you loved lime, buddy, I have the job for you. And finally, number 1, the battle of the stray dog. I grew up with dogs my whole life. It's stressful at times. You know, you open the door for a split second and all of a sudden your furry friend, the love of your life, is running down the street after a blue jay. It's just like, please don't do that. Please come back. Since the Second Balkan War in the early 1900s, Greece and Bulgaria were going head to head. A lot of conflict, a lot of emotions, tensions are high. Now come October 1925, things escalated to an unbelievable point. A Greek soldier was chasing after his dog, who just decided to bolt randomly, as these dogs do in life. But in doing so, he accidentally crossed the border into Bulgaria. The Greeks at this point were beyond upset, so they marched into Bulgaria, and so began a full-on war, right? Everyone's retaliating to everyone, but really it's just this dog in the middle who accidentally caused such a conflict. By the time the International Committee negotiated a ceasefire to clear up the obvious and horrible misunderstanding, 50 people had already lost their lives. Keep those leashes on, I guess, when you go for your afternoon walkie tonight.